Hi, my name is Mara Davis. This is August 20th, 2023, and I am here to present my personal narrative for MDS 410. So just jumping right into this, I just have to say that this assignment was an incredible opportunity to kind of view my life and my experiences in a really linear perspective, which I've never taken the time to do before. So it was incredibly therapeutic and meditative, and I just really enjoyed the opportunity to work on this assignment. Starting off my personal narrative, I decided to jump into something that was going to be a little bit attention getting, but also something that I wanted to set the tone for the rest of my paper with, which was a little bit of a look into my sobriety story. And I get into that later in the paper, but I wanted to start my paper off with this because I thought that would set a good, raw, honest, vulnerable tone for the rest of my paper. And so setting that tone early was important to me because that's exactly the way that I wanted to present the rest of my narrative. So just jumping right into my chapter 1, I really wanted to talk about my early life, my history, because it plays such a role, obviously, into my adult life and things that are going to come later in the paper. And I wanted to give my reader a really, again, honest, vulnerable look to who my parents were, who I was growing up, the struggles that my parents faced, the struggles that I faced and my sister faced, because those are so important to the rest of my story. And I am incredibly close with all of my family members. And so it was just a really good opportunity to talk about them and their struggles and how they've grown from that and become the amazing people that they are today. And, looking into my sister and my relationship, because I only have one sibling, it was really heavily impacted by my sobriety, or my lack thereof, I should say. And I didn't want to get too into the paper just because I was, already writing about so much. And I didn't want to necessarily relate everything back to my sobriety story or my recovery, but it did play a huge part. And again, I'm so glad to be where I am today and to have kind of reconciled and rebuilt the relationship with not just my sister, but the rest of my family and my friend group. I'm actually in a little cabin today for my college best friend's wedding. And it's just one of these moments where I'm so thankful for where I am right now in the work that I've done, because for a long time, I could not show up as a good friend to this person or to many people. And so it's just a gift to be able to be where I'm at today. And I'm just excited to be a part of it. So jumping into the rest of my history, I talk about my parents, I talk about my sister. I talk about how when I was in middle school and high school, I was so straight and narrow, and looking back, it was a lot of people pleasing. I never wanted my parents to be disappointed in me. I never wanted my sister to be disappointed. I never wanted my two best friends to be disappointed in me either. So there was so much looking back that I did just to kind of stave off that potential rejection from them. There was a lot of things I didn't do, like, partaking in substances and stuff when I was in middle school and high school, because I was afraid of the impact that would have on my family and my friends and my future. And, again, looking back, I am grateful to have had people in my life that kept me on that straight and narrow when, there were so many opportunities where I could have chosen to take substances and engage in that aspect of, kind of young people, teenager life, in order to deal with or self-medicate with, the depression and my anxiety that I had from really early on. So I'm just very lucky that wasn't my part of my story, that I had other coping mechanisms back then, like reading and music, and finding people like my high school counselor, Miss Reebley, that I was able to connect with, and again, just kind of stave off those not so great habits, I guess, like the things that could have been huge deterrents to me being not productive person in society necessarily, but just barriers between me and the life that I wanted to live and kind of the life that I have today. And it's so interesting looking back from my senior year when I kind of started to dabble a little bit in substances to where I was at my freshman year of college. And looking back at that, which is where I met my best friends whose wedding I'm going to today, looking back at that, it was such a beautiful time of my life. Like, I just remember never feeling as happy or as comfortable as I did that year. I felt like I had really come into my own. I was doing pretty well in school that first year. I remember my mom being so proud that I got straight A's, because growing up I was never really a straight A student. I was kind of took hard classes, but got B's, B pluses, really good grades looking back, but not necessarily like perfect 100% A's like I got my freshman year of college. And I think a big component of that was that my parents financially helped me that first year. So I didn't have to worry about getting a job or working. Like, I could just focus on school and friends and, starting this whole new chapter of my life. But looking back, I also remember like the devastation that came with that summer after my freshman year of college. I remember my mom, my parents living in Lake Stevens. My sister lived with her fiance down in Bothell, and I lived in Bellingham. And I went home, especially during the summer, I went home really frequently just to come and visit and stuff. And there were times when my parents' fighting was so bad. I remember one specific time my parents' fighting was so bad that I looked at both of them in the kitchen while they're like mid-fight, and I told them, if this is what it's going to be like every time I come home, I'm not going to come home anymore. And my mom, I started crying. I went to my room. My mom came in, and she was just like, being a mother was difficult, but it hasn't been nearly as hard as being a wife. And that moment has stuck with me my entire life. And I remember getting a call from my mom a couple months later, like 2 or 3 months later, asking me and my sister to come over for breakfast. And she was going to like make us a big breakfast. And I remember my sister and I showed up, and then we left to go get coffee before breakfast started. And we were in the car and we were talking, and my sister and I were both talking about how, it seems like mom and dad are doing really well right now. Like, we do not see them fighting. Like, the energy seems more peaceful and calm. And we get home 5 minutes later, and my mom sits us down in the kitchen and lets us know that she's asking our dad for a divorce. And it says so much about mine and my sister's personalities that my instinct was just to like immediately start crying and breaking down. And my sister is so like analytical, logical based. Her mind automatically was like, okay, what are the next steps? What is the plan? What's going to happen? Are you guys going to live together? Who's moving out? All these things. And that was amazing looking back, because my head was just not in that space to be thinking about logistics right then. But I've struggled with the idea that my parents' divorce has been the catalyst for my substance use, because they happened around the same time, and I was pretty emotionally devastated around the divorce. But hearing so many other people's sobriety stories where it was like a death in the family, or some big like huge cataclysmic event was the reason that kind of like sparked their substance use. That wasn't my story. But at the same time, I've lived a really privileged, and I recognize I've lived a really privileged life where I haven't had a ton of tragedy. I haven't had a ton of trauma. So in my brain, that divorce was the single most like traumatic thing that had happened to me so far in 19 years. And I just remember like, I've always kind of had that addictive personality of like, I can't just eat like one brownie, I eat the entire pan, or I can't just watch one episode of a TV show, I need to binge the entire season in one sitting. And I've always had this like voice in the back of my head that reminds me like, hey, let's do things in moderation, let's slow down, and gives me those kind of reasons why I should slow down and why I should stop at one. And it worked pretty well for me growing up. But I remember after the divorce, it's like that voice went away. And my internal monologue, my internal dialogue was now, screw it. Like, anytime I wanted to drink, my brain would try to come up with reasons why I probably shouldn't right now. Like, it's It's 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. You've got lecture in 30 minutes, and my brain would just say, screw it, we're going to go get drunk anyways. Maybe we'll show up to class, maybe we won't. And that was how I lived those next few years, was just in that space of screw it. My sister and her fiance got married, and that's, where I got my DUI. And I just remember that just constantly being the narrative. Like, oh, should I maybe not drink a bottle of wine as I'm driving down to my sister's bachelorette party? Brain saying, screw it, we're going to do it anyways. And just over and over and over again, instances of that happening. And it started to become this thing where I felt like I wasn't in control of my brain anymore. I wasn't in control of my body, that my cravings were so strong that I would go to any length to kind of kill that craving. And that just became my life, was this constant pursuit of substance and pleasure and, dopamine and wherever I was going to get that from. And then there just came this time in my life where I was supposed to be sober. Legally speaking, I was supposed to be sober, and I could not stay sober. But the second that I would cave and I would drink or I would smoke, my immediate thought was, this isn't worth it. This feeling right now that I've been craving all day is not worth it. But at the same time, I couldn't stop. So I was so happy, so lost, so scared to walk into that first room at the detox facility where there ended up being an AA meeting. And it's so incredible for me to look back on that, because I feel like that was kind of my rebirth in a way. When traumatic things happen, I think people can think, oh, you're just going to fall down. And then if you're lucky, you're just going to get right back up at the same level you were again. But that was not my story, because I love myself, and I've loved myself at every chapter, well, for most chapters. That's kind of a new thing I'm learning, is how to love myself in every chapter. But I am such a different person than the one I was before I even started drinking. And I don't think that version of me is a person I want to go back to, is that version of myself from before I started drinking. I think that I fell down and I bounced up 10 times higher. And I am just so thankful to be here, to be back in school, to be finishing my degree. It has been a struggle, leaving that AA room, starting to go to meetings, getting really involved in AA. COVID happening was a huge thing for me. But I have to say, as an introvert, it was really nice to be able to just sit at home and go to meetings. Nice to be able to have my cat next to me while I'm going to a meeting. It was a good time in my life, but I was also so excited to get back into the meeting structure. And, moving out of COVID and moving out of my caregiving life and into this amazing position within my school district has been just incredible. And I'm just so thankful now for the experience of getting sober. When I'm sitting in meetings, I often hear people, and I've started to say, hi, my name is Mara, and I'm a grateful, recovered alcoholic. And when I was in the rooms for the first time, I could not wrap my head around that. How can somebody be grateful to be an alcoholic and be in recovery? Early sobriety was so tough. I wouldn't wish this on anybody, or at least that was my thought process in the beginning. But looking back now, it's just not only have I been able to get sober, I actually could say that that's the easy part. The staying sober now at almost, 4.5 years sober, the not drinking isn't the hard part, but the hard part is cultivating a life and creating a version of myself where I don't have to drink anymore, and living a life where that doesn't sound appealing. That's not an option for me anymore. That was a Band-Aid, and I've created a version of myself where I'm always intent on fixing the issue, not putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms. So, my experience in Western and in this major specifically, I just have to say has been incredible. I have had the opportunity to take so many different classes, to learn so much about myself. And I am just so happy to be here and to pull all of all of that knowledge together into somebody who's going to be such a well-rounded individual. So thank you for this, and thank you so much for your time.